You probably believe the wrong things without even realizing it. And so today we're going to be talking about programming myths. Regardless of where you are in your career, a lot of these people still believe to this day. I know I've met quite a few people that have fallen into this, and it's not just a junior thing, it's across the board. So we are going to be talking about programming myths, some that exist, some that do not anymore, some that have been disproven, and some that people still don't even know is inaccurate. Before we get into all that, we are back with another one. I'm excited for this one. I think this is going to be an interesting one. I think people are going to get a lot of value out of this. If you followed this podcast for a while, you know we every once in a while we come out with what I like to call Gem City.
Oh, yeah.
I have a feeling today is going to be Gem City for quite a few people. This is a note-taking one for sure. Before we get into all that, I am one of your hosts. My name is Danny Thompson. I'm the Director of Technology at This.Labs and the community organizer for the Commit Your Code conference happening in less than a month from now.
Let's go. And I'm Leon Noel, Managing Director of Engineering for a wonderful nonprofit called Resilient Coders and teacher at a wonderful community called 100 Devs.
It is a wonderful community.
So this one became pretty fun as an idea for me right off the rip as something cheeky that we'll start off with, which is a myth that we hear constantly thrown, especially to our more early career developers. And we're going to get into some more technical ones, but right off the rip, I thought it'd be funny to talk about the AI is going to take our jobs myth. We are, as I always like, the Prime Engine puts out a tweet every once in a while. It's like, we're 2 years in the AI taking our jobs, or we're 3 years in the AI taking our jobs. We've had all these people that stepped up to the bat that told us in 6 months the jobs are gone. In 9 months, the AI will be writing all the code. And consistently, that doesn't come true. But what made this even more fun to talk about is a podcast that the CEO of Amazon AWS did recently, where during that interview they just put it all out there, and they said using AI to replace junior level talent, and this is them quoted, the dumbest thing they've ever heard. And so you can listen to us talk to you about it, but to hear one of the most in tune individuals at one of the largest tech companies reiterate that statement, I don't know what else you need to hear today. Don't delay. Learn today. This is a wonderful career that could be continually putting food on the table. And if you had listened to that myth 3 years ago, you would have missed out. You would have listened to that myth 2 years ago, you would have missed out. If you would have listened to that myth just a few weeks ago, you would already be missing out. So I think that's what we're trying to get to in this conversation. Or what are those things that you might have learned or picked up that we can peek behind the curtain a little bit, talk a little bit about, and hopefully give you some more understanding as we work through today's episode.
You want to know, I even tweeted this out literally yesterday or this morning. I can't remember which. I have been trying to make an image, like a hand-sketched image of me. It's like a photo of somebody took of me having my finger up, like saying something. And I thought I could memeify this, right? And I was like, okay, I went through, I don't even care to admit how long I spent on this, but I went through so many iterations of prompting AI, hey, I would love it if you could put my left arm, my left hand that is pointing in the air, keep it there, and my right hand that is across my body in my arm, rest it in the fold of my arm. This is like black magic sorcery to AI. Like, it has no clue what I'm talking about. And there were so many iterations where you would tell it, don't change anything in this image and only touch this arm. It'd be like, perfect, totally change the face. Perfect, totally change the finger that's pointing up to the middle finger instead. Like, I've got so many versions. I got an image with 3 arms.
Yep.
And this is why I always go back to, on certain things, AI is fantastic. And on certain things, it's the biggest miss I've ever seen. And that's why I go back to one thing. When you're leveraging AI as a productivity tool, you're in a great space. But if you're leveraging it as like, it should one-shot everything for me, you're gonna have a really bad time with a lot of it.
Yep.
So I remember even one video that went viral, and I spent days looking for it. I can't find it, but it was two Indian guys that I guess they're influencers on Instagram or something, and they made an Instagram video where they said by March of 2024 there will be no such thing as a software developer, and so you need to jump into XYZ instead. And I was like, that's the craziest thing. And I remember mentioning it in their comments, and I got so many hate messages. You don't know what you're talking about. And I wanted to find it to be like, I would love to reference this video now as proof that AI won't be around, but I cannot find it for the life of me.
That's hilarious.
But definitely a myth that has been disproven.
I feel compelled to share my sauce on the AI image gen stuff. I spent a lot of time with AI image gen. I have a lot of weird things I figured out. And it's also interesting, all the different models, what they're good or not good at. One of my favorite things about like Sora and any of the open AI models is they're just really bad at faces. So they might be able to get all the other pieces, but then you'll look like a completely different person. But my hack that has been working so well with friends, family, people is to make the image have motion blur. Like you were in this, like you were walking down the street and took the photo, because it hides all the imperfections. So I have photos of me with like The Rock, whatever like TV show my family's watching. I'll like, oh, I bumped into them downtown in LA, and it looks like the photo, and no one has caught on. It's just the idea of like that blur just getting us over the uncanny valley just enough. And so I have like this really massive prompt that works. I'll put it in the show notes. But I just wanted to throw that because as soon as you're saying, I was like, I got to tell people about this because it works. It's the only time I've ever seen AI image gen, and people are like, oh, like they can't tell. So
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm interested to see that too. Okay, want to go into the next myth?
Yeah, sure. So there's a lot of different things that kind of come to mind. And I think one of the first big ones is in the beginning of your career, you spend a lot of time on things like data structures and algorithms, big O notation, and a lot of our audience takes that stuff as truth to the 1000th degree. And so I think one of the interesting things to talk about from an early stage is when we look at things like big O notation, that paper math not always being the true representation of which thing would be faster, like what set of code would be faster. So you would see something like an O of n versus something that's more logarithmic, and make your conclusions based off of the paper math. But there are a lot of other factors that go into that aren't just raw numbers. And so how does data move into memory? How do we actually see these scenarios play out in the real world? And so if you're somebody who's learning these things for the first time, it's understanding that there are a lot of constraints that play out. And the other thing too, that I think when people are learning this big O notation, they don't really focus on like why we're doing the paper math as opposed to just raw speed. And that comes down to computers being different, right? You could have a massive PC that has all the cores, all the threads, and it's going to perform very, very different than a Chromebook. So we do need this way of approximating, this way of figuring out the potential for speed that may not just be indicative of pressing run on our computers and getting there. The other thing I like to think about is you can have a path somewhere, but one path can be nice, smooth, and paved, and you have another path that is gravel. And so time or distance isn't necessarily the factor of how fast things are going to go. That gravel pathway can be shorter, but take longer. And that smooth pathway can be a lot longer, right? And so you have to take into effect how you're doing and moving through those pieces as well. So that's one I always think that comes up is especially folks that are early in their career taking some of this as dogma, and I think it's fun to think about those.
Yeah, and I'll even take this like a step further, especially like the the big O aspect. It's like one thing that I often try to come back to is big O isn't all that matters. There's a lot of layers to this. The average tech organization really doesn't prioritize creating amazing algorithms. They will often tell you don't waste too much effort and time on that. Bump out the ticket, get on the next one. Performance isn't that big of a deal. This narrative definitely changes the higher up the scale you go in the levels of tech organizations. But one thing that I've often said is you should be measuring a lot of this with realistic data sizes versus like asymptomatics or doing something that's just completely out there. And I also think we often don't reference or look at like cache misses or allocations. Like these are things that should be in the conversation when you're looking at it. I was over here thinking like even like a well vectorized ON that passes and touches like linear memory can beat a catch thrashy ON, or even like ON log N, and that would jump around. So it's like if you're sorting 10,000 items versus scanning 10 million rows, that tells two very different stories. And so sometimes that's like a big thing to be paying attention to on that. Yeah, that's pretty much my thought on that one. Okay. All right, let's move on to the next one. I have one.
What do you got?
And this is actually one I perpetuated myself. That jQuery is completely dead, and anyone touching it is doing themselves a disservice. I actually believe that, like pre-pandemic, I would constantly talk about that. Yeah, I would say in this regard, in regards to jQuery, I actually just spoke to somebody recently, and I believe jQuery is celebrating like their 25th anniversary or 20th anniversary, one of the two. And it's still widely used. Obviously, it's not the hottest, coolest tool around. It doesn't have the buzz around it, but there are people that are literally paying their bills using jQuery. The same way that people are, I actually met someone recently who's still using Knockout.js. So it's like there's tons of not hot tools out there. Not obviously is the most performant thing in the world to do. Is it the coolest thing in the world to do? Could the company optimize? Absolutely. But I think it goes back to the same narrative too. Just because a new tool comes out, it doesn't mean a company adopts it right away. For companies to adopt a tool, it takes a very, very, very long time. Which brings me to another one. Deno.js was the node killer. That one, I forgot about it. I should have added them. Deno.js was the node killer. Now, I don't think Deno is bad. I don't think Bun is bad. I think they're great tools. But I remember when they came out, oh my goodness, the amount of like times I had to explain to somebody, even if Deno is going to kill it, what you know in Node will transfer over. Please don't stop and abandon what you're doing now for this, because more than likely the companies that you're trying to get a job at haven't switched anything over to this social media buzzworthy thing. But it also goes to show a lot of these quote unquote older tools are still widely utilized in the industry, and they're probably not going anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah. And with jQuery, it's just bundled with so much stuff. It just, I was using some sort of like icon font the other day, and the way something worked was just jQuery was bundled in there. So there's like all these remnants of it throughout the industry. And I think we have to give credit. Like jQuery solved some real problems back in the day, like the cross-browser compatibility, the ability to kind of have easier DOM targeting, like all that stuff kind of, I mean, it saved my butt back in the day quite a bit. And we went towards, I love the line by DHH, the merchants of complexity. We went really off the deep end in certain areas of front end development. And some folks just don't care. If they can get the product done, they're not worried about scaling to bajillions. They just want something that gives them good DOM manipulation, ways to handle Ajax, asynchronous type stuff. Like what else do they need? If you could figure out to do some like basic state management with jQuery, then you're almost all the way there for a lot of the stuff people might want at the like early stages, right? And so I think it's fun to see that jQuery is still alive and well. I think it's really interesting to think about what what happened that we shifted away, right? Like we know that, like we know why, but what did we lose along the way? And is there something that can be spoken to around the simplicity of what jQuery brought to the table? And so I think this kind of snowballs into something I think about a lot as a myth when folks are first learning JavaScript. And so we have a lot of folks that might be listening to this that JavaScript might be your first language. You've probably been writing it for a while. You're probably not writing jQuery, but you are doing things like document that get docket element by ID. You're doing document.query selector. You're doing set timeout. You're doing all these things that you're just learning and writing about as JavaScript. And that kind of always blows my students' minds. And I'm like, that's not JavaScript. That is an API that you are getting access to because the environment in which you are running your JavaScript. If you look at the actual JavaScript specification, it doesn't come with those things. It's just that you're running your JavaScript in probably the browser for those things. Node, Deno, I'm sure has the equivalents, right? And when you run your JavaScript in that environment gives you access to something called the DOM, right? And so then with the DOM, you get access to all those methods, you get access to all of those wonderful tidbits, but JavaScript itself doesn't have it. So I think if you've been writing JavaScript early and you've been utilizing those things, it's worthwhile to understand what the difference between the language and the environment, because you might not be writing what you think you are.
You know, another one that I just thought of as you were saying that, I remember this earlier in my career, and that was map and reduce are much slower than for loops. And I remember hearing that so often. And I was like, and I guess, you know, early in my career, you hear like somebody say that, you just take it for what it is. You don't put in a ton of research like, oh yeah, like my senior says it must be true, et cetera, et cetera. Modern engines today, especially, like the optimization is very heavy. Like it's very performant compared to maybe the earlier days where this may have been true. It's definitely not true now. There's like documentation for like for loops and for each. It's on par with pretty much everything at this point. And so there may be differences like depending on the version, perhaps. But generally speaking, this is no longer a very accurate stance anymore. And so if you feel like you're saving or shaving seconds or milliseconds by using a for loop instead of mapping over an array, probably incorrect at this point.
Yeah. All right. What else you got on your list? This actually.
Oh, I got one. Some of this I'm just thinking of like in real time because I'm just thinking back on my career now. End-to-end testing makes unit tests completely unnecessary. I remember this was maybe 2019. Might have been 2019. And a team that was adjacent to our team basically told their entire team, stop writing unit tests. We don't need it. We just need end-to-end pipelines. That's going to cover the whole application. Why would we ever need anything else? Wild. It was definitely accepted for quite some time, at least from my perspective. If you didn't hear that, kudos to your company. But I would say that to me, that's like a big one. Unit testing, I'm very prolific on the value of unit tests, so much so that even when I taught at boot camps and I wasn't part of the curriculum, I drilled it into the students to know how to unit test. I'm a big believer in your unit tests can really tell whether you are an absolute beginner in tech to someone who's maybe seasoned. Like, and it's an extra form of documentation. Like if I join a company, that's generally the first thing that I'm reading just to kind of understand what are they even using this application for, because they're thinking through what the customer and the clients are going to end up utilizing it for, right? So if I understand the customer flows from the unit test, I can now develop a better product just based off of that alone. Unit test, extremely necessary. And you end up thinking through edge cases, which oftentimes end to end doesn't always cover in the most detailed way. It's making sure the application is running, but those minor weird details and edge cases, it'll never be something that's catching regularly.
Yeah, I think so many of these are just like what became popular, and then bad developers made them hot mess. So then the zeitgeist swung the other way, and so jQuery was like that too, right? Like it was awesome. I loved writing jQuery, but in the wrong hands, it became a hot mess, and then we swung the other way. Unit tests, phenomenal. I love writing unit tests, but in the wrong hands, it just slows down. It doesn't like it doesn't work for every developer, doesn't know how to utilize it correctly, and then people swing the other way saying, just do integration tests. It doesn't pass, then we go back, right? Like, so all this stuff is like, all right, if done well, phenomenal. If not, people swing hard the other way, and I think that's pretty funny.
You know what's interesting about that though? I will say jQuery, my first like take home coding assignment I did in jQuery for a JavaScript role that they never mentioned a framework for, and they were like, actually, we were looking for you to write this in Angular, and I was like, you never told me that. They're like, yeah, jQuery is kind of dated. How long have you been in tech? I'm like, oh, I'm trying to get my first job. They're like, oh, you're really learning dated stuff. I was like, oh, so that's when I end up going to different frameworks. But jQuery is awesome, man.
Yeah. And so with the testing, I'm kind of in the weird spot where I see the value. I do have a bigger penchant for paying more close. I see the unit testing for helping me as a developer. I see other testing as like helping me for like the health of my application, right? Like, what do I pay attention to? Like, as I'm developing, yes, unit tests, but like as someone who's trying to keep track of the product as it builds out, I find myself leaning more and more towards valuing the integration and testing to see if like product breaks, right? So I'm kind of like in a weird spot with my developer journey around some of this, just from having listened to a lot of developers that I think are way better at this stuff than me, and trying to like figure out, all right, what in terms of like speed. And the reason why this is coming up, just so you know my rambling, is like AI and AI's place in your development process around tests, right? Are you using AI to like help you with your tests significantly or not yet?
I have so much I want to say, but I'm going to let you finish your point first. I will use and leverage AI for making tests to mock data, because I've never enjoyed mocking data. And so it speeds up my process significantly just from that standpoint alone. But generally speaking, a lot of the tests that I've found AI making are very surface level, very basic. So it's not getting to the level that I would want at a granular level to find the edge cases. That's the main reason why.
So this is kind of, it's a really weird point I'm trying to make, but that's exactly it. I feel like with my use of AI and my test, I'm not using my brain as much anymore. I'm putting a bunch of crap out there that should be making me more like productive or better, but I'm not sure if that's true. I think what I got out of testing is me thinking through a lot of this stuff. And I don't know if this makes any sense at all to anybody, but in my brain, it's like, I worry that I'm focusing on the wrong thing as I am developing, and I'm polluting my test with AI, which is, do I lose the benefit of my test in this new world? So that, I don't know if I'm making a coherent point there, so I'm curious to hear your reaction to it, but it's something I'm thinking about. Yeah,
I definitely have thoughts on this. I'm going to table my reactions that I had to earlier statements for a moment, because I want to get to this. Number one, it seems like you're saying that by having AI make your test, it just felt like you were losing touch with the code. You didn't really understand what was going on, and you're just having it mass produce stuff that is just very mediocre, and you didn't feel like you were learning a lot in that process, which I could definitely agree with, which is also the reason why I say AI would be mocking my test for me, but I would be making things that are more granular, because AI doesn't really fully understand your customer flows the way that you would, or it can't think outside of the box to the point where you know how a client or customer could potentially break something, which is why I go back to that thing. Like, I don't want AI making those tests for me. But it kind of goes back to one example that I use pretty often. If I can have AI, let's say I have a Jira ticket, right? And let's say it's maybe a 5-pointer, which in some companies could mean a week, some companies could mean 3 days, just depends where you work. But let's say 3 days for easy math here, right? Let's say everything that I do, AI can leverage and basically get me 80% of the way there, right? And then I'm only really focused on the high level 20%, right? That means it theoretically saved me 2.5-ish days, give or take, on the stuff that's just monotonous average items. And then the 20% is high level thought, processes, thinking about scaling, et cetera, which, if I'm being honest, was the thing that I loved the most about programming anyway. I've never been excited about making a button, but I've always been excited about making the thing that triggers and the things that correlate with that button being pressed, whether it's the microservice, whether it's an API, whatever it may be at that point. So for me, that's kind of where I'm seeing AI. And so if it can get me 80% of the way there on the unit test, and then the 20% is testing the things that I think would really break the code base, that's the item. And so for me, the reason why I think unit tests are actually more important in using AI versus outside of it, it's because of that. It's not testing or thinking about or going through flows that an average consumer or client would do that would break in weird ways. And that is why you need more thought around it ever more than before. Yeah. And the best part about that too is, as your AI and LLM models are referencing your tests, it gives it a new way to think about your application that it didn't have the context of previously. So now it can have more performant responses for you over time as it learns your code base. That is a big context item right there that makes it even more important to have them, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. Now, all this stuff about not like take it back right now. Take it back, Leon. Leon, take it back right now.
We got feature flags, bro. Do we need any of this stuff for?
Oh. Oh my goodness. Have my
Sometimes my
blood
show notes are just, this will make Danny pop off. I don't believe any of this, but I know if I say it.
So, and for those that don't know, oftentimes when it comes to these episodes, Leon makes his stuff, I make mine. We don't share notes. Mm-hmm. Kind of like that previous episode, New York Times. It's kind of like we're seeing what our thought process is on certain things. And I find it interesting and fun sometimes because it gives me an insight into who Leon is and where his thought process comes on some of the stuff, which I enjoy. But yeah.
Likewise.
Okay, I've got one. Now, this could also be because I am more on the Java side of things at times, which is definitely not the hot, cool thing in the world, but I like it. Two things that come to my mind is Java is slow, and garbage collection automatically means it's a bad performing tool or bad performance. These are the ones that come to my mind. Especially, I remember I've never had like a dedicated one-on-one mentor, but someone who I often revered or looked at as like a figure of inspiration and like a really phenomenal developer. He's retired now, but dude knew his stuff beyond all belief. He's actually a big reason why I was able to wrap my mind around Golang in a better way. I was taking a lot of things in Golang incorrectly, and I was struggling with some of the concepts. For example, in like Golang, you have to explicitly write out every error. There's no like try catch in JavaScript with Golang, and that was like just a paradigm that I just could not figure out for the life of me. It just made bad sense. I kept, at least at that time to me, it kept driving me crazy. And he was the one that first brought this argument to me, because I would hear it every now and again, like, oh, why are you using Java for that? You should use this or that or this other tool. Java's so slow. It's so verbose. Yeah. Verbose, I give you that one. Like, you know, I still have that habit. If you see a lot of my code bases, I have very long, detailed variable names and functions. But Java being slow, it's just not there, especially like later. These later versions are just mind-blowingly impressive compared to maybe what you would have once thought about previously. Of course, Java has microservices in it, which a lot of people think of Rust and Golang for. And Rust is cool. I like Rust a lot, but just no jobs in it compared to any of these other tools. And so you could have microservices in Java. You could have all these things that just speed up performance in a dramatic way. And garbage collection, for example, it doesn't mean, in my opinion, that it's bad. Region-based and concurrent collectors achieve sub-millisecond pauses if they're tuned accurately. Like the real enemy of any of these tools is allocation patterns that may disrupt the actual collection being taking place. So I would say it's not accurate that if you are in that realm, these aren't accurate things anymore.
Yeah, and I think it's just also something that probably a lot of our audience doesn't regularly think about. A lot of folks maybe coming from the JavaScript ecosystem, V8 engine, kind of handling a lot of this stuff for us. And so I could definitely see that maybe perpetuating a little bit as developers get further and further away from that stuff if they haven't been in an org that uses those types of technologies yet. Yeah.
Oh, you know, there's one I just thought about. This one was like hammered into me in the beginning of my career. Everything has to be dry. Don't repeat yourself. I don't know why this just came to my mind. Dry was like one of the biggest principles I learned early. And I've even said it for a long time. I no longer believe you have to have everything dry. I believe that there are situations where it may be valid. And I'm on record. I don't know if I've said it on this podcast, but I'm on record on a lot of mediums where I'm anti too many levels of abstraction. And I often think if you've only wrote it once and you're like prop drilling to push it down somewhere, that's a bad habit. Like that shouldn't be the case. If you're having to use it at a component that's like 4 or 5 levels deep, and so you're just prop drilling all the way down, that's terrible in my opinion. I would rather you rewrite it at a lower level where it can just be used there instead of passing it into components and props that don't necessarily need them and they only exist as a chain to pass it down. So you should be able to repeat yourself. It shouldn't be a hard 100% never utilizing or never rewriting something just because you wrote it once. It should serve a purpose if you're doing it more than once, but it's not an end all, be all, break all if you write something twice or 3 times. Especially if it's preventing you from going too many layers of abstraction. Because one of my biggest things that I hate is if I'm in a component and I'm trying to understand how something is working, and to find that code, and I got to go through this component and this component and this component. It's just a bad experience overall. But so much can be manipulated or lost within that process, and it's too dangerous, in my opinion, to leave it like that.
Yeah, and I think this is again kind of going back to these things that are presented as fact. That as you go deeper in your career or your knowledge, you realize there's always a after all the things that you're learning, right? And so I think some of the big ones, like you mentioned, dry, separation of concerns, anything clean code. These are all things that you hear at the beginning of your career that you got to go as you get deeper into it. And so I think if you're listening to this, you want to have strong opinions held weekly, right? And a lot of times your strong opinions come from reading the material, reading the books that implement these systems as kind of early guardrails to keep you on track. You should use that to inform your thinking, to make sure that you have the reason, the rhyme and reason why you're writing the code in the way that you're writing it. But as you learn more and as you grow, you hold those things weekly, right? So you'll get to the point to where you see the limits of dry, you see the limits of these things that are early in your career, good guardrails. And the sooner you can get to that point, the better, honestly. But I think that's another big one. It's just that don't hold these things that you learn early on strongly.
Yeah, and I think that's the other thing too. You know what I've kind of noticed through my career and even in a lot on like tech Twitter, for example, people that are in the earlier stages of learning to code, they will share things that they learn right away as like, this is a fact, et cetera, et cetera. And then these same people, because I follow them for years, over time you start realizing their narrative changes. It's like, actually, It's not really fact. It's circumstantial.
Yeah.
And I think we all go through that. I think it's just part of growth at that point. One extra thing that I'll even say that I think we all know now, but especially many years ago, this was not the rhetoric, and that was anything accessibility related can wait. It's not a priority. It doesn't have to be something that we're allocating developer time towards, etc. That has really changed, for the better, in my opinion. But like, to be honest, I think it should have been that way throughout the whole process. And I think the biggest reason why it was held back for, in my opinion, wasn't that like doing things accessible take more time. It only takes more time because you're used to doing it without it. And so it's like, if you had it from the beginning and you were always adding an ARIA label to whatever you're doing, or you're always adding alt text to whatever you're doing, you're not even thinking about it. You're just doing it at that point. And so I think that's the reason why accessibility took so long to do. I'm super proud that the new version of the DAO software developer site, when somebody was giving me some feedback on it, he said, I will say, for this to be a website that you haven't published to production yet, and you were just trying to get feedback on the UI, for it to have 100% accessibility score, mind blowing to me. And I'm
That's
like,
great.
but it's like you're
But
doing
that's the
it.
default. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Should be.
I think that's good.
I love it. All right. I have a singular word.
Mm.
Cloud.
Oh, did we read minds on this one? Okay.
Sure.
I think we might be on the same one on this one.
Go for it.
Mine is, and actually my very last job before my current role is the one that cleared this up for me. Cloud is always cheaper than on-prem.
Yeah.
Is that where you're going with it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So so two paths. Cloud is always cheaper. And then my other thing is there is no cloud. It's just somebody else's computer, which is a big free software catchphrase. But yes, cloud being always cheaper is one of the bigger things that I think a lot of people think about now. We have so many folks that don't even think like on-premise, like they would never in a million years be a consideration for some folks. But I think we're coming back around. I think we're back, baby. Yeah.
Yeah. I worked at AutoZone. And AutoZone was doing a lot of cloud migrations. And as they started doing the numbers, they're like, we're literally paying more than when we owned our own data centers and we had everything on-prem. And they halted all that because they're like, where's the benefit? We're actually not faster. It is not scaling at the level that we want. Everything that we want to do just increases the cost dramatically. Every time we bring in an expert from Google, wherever, it's like, oh, this is going to cost you more in order to get this. It's like, let's just go back to our servers. And they literally did that. And they saved so much money. Things were very performant because of it. They had more security guards in place. It just made more sense at the end of the day. And I think there's a certain point when you get to certain areas of scale where it's like doing something serverless doesn't make sense.
Yep.
Doing something like this doesn't make sense. And I often think about cloud, serverless, all that. It creates pathways for smaller teams to execute and match competition. But there's a point where it's like, this no longer makes sense. This shouldn't be the rhetoric. Why did we listen to the hype and run with this? And like, for example, one that was like huge hype for a while that had everybody question everything was Jamstack. Everything Jamstack.
Yeah.
I don't hear really anybody talking about that anymore. So whether the hype is there or not, one thing or another, I think the longer that you're on social media, and this might just be like old man Danny at this point, but it's like you see these hype cycles come and go around these technologies and tools that people want to push out to where you're like, okay, where's the hype? Where's the reality? Where is the non-existent truth? Let's find myself in the middle and kind of weed my way through it. AI, also similar aspect. I think my take has always been pretty accurate on it. I don't think I've deviated too much. I do agree with you. Your opinions should always be able to kind of adjust. I've always said I'm not married to anything. I'll easily change my position on something based on enough fact or information that is related with it. And I think that should be the way that you carry stuff, especially in tech, because things change so drastically. Matter of fact, use effect is a big one, even like concepts around that.
Yeah. The Jamstack hits close to the heart. Had two big sites that were on it that I kind of just neglected for a while, and getting them to build now, nightmare. Absolute nightmare. Like, we're talking like image stuff using 2.7 Python, like just nasty dependency issues. Absolute mess to get it kind of working again. Took me a very long time. And then the other thing too, one of the big things that made me start thinking this way is I had the privilege of touring the Boston public school system's infrastructure. And they made the decision to not use the cloud. And so they have a building, like a building for all their admin downtown in Boston. And on one of the floors, they have a server room. And the server room's the size of, I don't know, small 1-bedroom apartment, maybe. And in that, they have all the infrastructure for the entire school system, email, individual sites, anything you could possibly think of. And got to talk to them. They're like, yeah, we have an upfront capital expenditure, right? Like, of course, but there's all of the perks that come along with that. For them, it's a budget, like a budget allocation. They only get budget so often, right? And so they were able to build out a very nice server room in a normal building. We're not talking some data warehouse somewhere that serves every single user across hundreds of thousands, right? Off of this like on-prem solution. I was like, wait a minute, like, This is it. This is the way that we get away from runaway cost, all this extra fluff that keeps getting tacked on and on and on. And I think you're right. I think there's like this moment where you in the beginning can take advantage of these cloud providers because you don't want to be changing hard drives in your pajamas at 3:00 in the morning. But at some point, the juice might just not be worth the squeeze. And I think we're finally starting to see that play out.
All right, y'all. It is time for everyone's favorite part of the podcast, including mine, the Ask Danny and Leon a Question. Now, this question is an interesting one. I don't think we've ever answered something like this before. I think we've talked about it, but I don't think we've ever like directly hit on this one. Hello, Danny and Leon. Hey. So last week, I got called a mid-level developer. When I was told this, my mindset completely shifted. The only way I can explain it is I felt proud because I did not see myself as a mid-level developer. I still kind of don't. So my question is, what is the difference between a junior, a mid-level developer, and a senior developer? And how do I know I'm at either one of these levels?
You ever see Whose Line Is It Anyway? It's all made up and the points don't matter.
Ooh,
yeah,
I like that one.
Yeah, I just initial gut reaction is every company is different. One company, a senior is a junior, and one company, a junior is a senior, right? And so there's like, if you're looking for like a company specific validation, you have to understand that every company's different. They value different things. And so you can't use that as like a determination of like where you're at as a developer, right? And so I think there are very different things that I think Danny and I would use to qualify an entry level, a mid level, and a senior. But if you're just looking at like a company ranking you, or even when you're applying to jobs and you're trying to figure out where you fit, I've just seen it all over the board. So I think it's just worthwhile to lay that groundwork, and then maybe for Danny and I to talk about like what we personally think gets someone there.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I think every company will rate this differently. And if you go to the FANGs of the world, their metrics will be significantly different than maybe a Fortune 500 or a Fortune 5000, etc. I think there are distinctions that I personally look at. Matter of fact, I'm curious, Leon, maybe you go first. I think my distinctions might actually be different than yours now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah. I think for me, it's just very clear. Senior can exist by themselves, right? Not in terms of like team, but like in terms of help needed. So senior, you can be assigned tasks and get those tasks completely independent. And then the more help you need, the kind of, I don't like to use the word lower, but like the closer to entry level you go. So an entry level engineer should be able to write code, but probably need more support. Mid-level, I would expect for you to be more independent, to be able to tackle most things kind of on your own, still checking in with senior level talent to make sure that you're doing maybe things in their specific way that that company is looking for. And then senior, I would expect to be able to hand something to them and for them to be able to kind of exist on their own. And then I guess there's some like levels above that too, like when you get into IC stuff and things like that. But that's kind of how I think about it in terms of if I would consider myself entry level, mid, or senior.
Okay. I just jotted down a couple of things that I think apply to this. I was a little right. There are definitely differences that I think about and look at when I'm looking at junior, mid, and senior. For me, there are a couple key areas that I'm thinking about. Number one, how much hand holding does someone require at each level? This is a big factor in the leveling. Number two, it is the level of guardrails required at each level and how much prep is required from my side to ensure they are safe. And so when I think of a junior developer, I have to have them in the safest of environments. The tickets can't be normal tickets. It has to be scoped at a level that just completely gets rid of any qualms or questions. So for the product manager, this is extra work. For the team lead, this is extra work. For the scrum master, they may be padding points for the junior dev to take more time on a task because we know it'll take them a little bit more time. I often also think about the lack of valuable questions that they're asking at that level. And so a junior dev may not ask questions that are very obvious, which we would deem obvious. And then when they go down the incorrect path, we are then saying, why didn't you ask this? Like, if you asked this, you would have saved your effort, our effort, the effort of the org. I would often think that they need to pair often. So that comes into the factor as well. They may not necessarily know a ton of great patterns, especially that we utilize within an organization. And so that would have to constantly be reinforced. Following like a team standards, essentially. I also think about impact. At a junior level, I pretty much just assume there's going to be no significant impact that you're making in that role. And that when you start making impact is when I start really thinking about it might be time for the level up. Like they've definitely broken out of that shell. When you get to, let's say, a mid-level, for example, I would often think about you starting to get clearer mindsets on how our product is relating to something. And so maybe you're no longer just saying, oh, we need to build this thing. You're thinking, oh, we need to build this thing because it might lead to more site performance. It might lead to a better checkout process. It might lead to supporting this microservice. You're thinking through things a little bit better and understanding how a lot of these pieces are connecting, which goes a long way. And if we're in, like, let's say a sprint planning meeting, for example, and we're talking about, oh, we need to add in this new feature, you're already starting to think like, oh, this feature exists here. And by doing this, it may actually compromise something. You don't require as many safeguards or the level of detail required in a ticket to make sure it's like crystal clear. Like you could do without some of the edge cases being completely written there for you or some of the details. You understand how certain things are correlating with each other. You could probably be at a stage where you're making trade-offs and you're able to talk through them. Like, oh, there's a reason why I didn't do this. It's because of this. And I think that goes a long way. You also are probably very good and very active at unblocking others, right? Like if you know like a junior dev is blocked by something, you might be the one to come to their rescue to be like, oh, I went through this before. You actually need XYZ. You can find that documentation here. Really helpful. That's great and goes a long way. But you still know what you don't know, right? Meaning once you start getting hit with really random things, you may know like this is the time where I need to ask for help or I need to raise the alarms, which is good. When I think of a senior, I often think of them not requiring much guardrails at all, but still requiring some, to be honest with you. It depends on the senior. You're fine with something being ambiguous, and you know when you need to start asking more questions. You can actually define problems and not just defining the direct solutions. Like, you can define, like, this is the problem set that's required here. You are good at, like, let's say, cleaner and more clear architecture decisions, but there's still, like, areas for improvement in that regard. You are much better at faster turnaround and lead times to kind of get things done. If you're on a project, my assumption would be that there would be far fewer outages compared to, like, a team of, like, let's say, majority of early, senior, mid-level developers. I'd be thinking that you're better there. You're also very active in team meetings to dispel misconceptions that a TP, like a product manager or a scrum master, may have. But you're also really good at pushing back and questioning things. So that way, like, if they just say something, you're not just being like, oh, okay. It's like, no, why would we do this? Like, we're not doing this now. That is where the mental models is kind of where I start looking at some of this and that shift. But the one thing that I wish more seniors had that I don't often see, but I see it at, like, staff engineer, product or staff engineer, or IC related roles, really, principals. It's asking really, really well thought out questions, questions that actually make the TPMs, the product managers, think for a minute, like, this is an angle we haven't considered, thought of. I don't find that it does happen, but I don't find it too often at the senior level. I definitely find it above. And so I've had, and I still have right now, a staff engineer who asks questions that almost push back on a new thing to where you have to almost defend it to where it's like, now everyone knows why this thing is working. And so I like that a lot. And I think the higher up you go, the more of that I would imagine there to be in there. And so I would also say, like, congrats to even being called a mid. Like, that's a win, right? Whether you recognize it or not doesn't matter. It's really up for others to recognize and perceive where you are. And so they're obviously seeing something in you to define and put you within that role, which is great, right? And I would say people often don't recognize all the effort you put into something, but they do recognize what is visible or what is showing. And so they may not see all your hard nights or long nights into what it is that you're doing, but they're seeing the byproduct of it. And so keep stacking that evidence and keep protecting your time and people's time, deliver value the way that you've been doing, obviously. And if you keep doing that consistently, your career is going to just take off, right? And so I would say keep running with that. And I would say, if you haven't already, try owning some initiatives a little bit. Like, find some tool that you can basically lead the charge on. And that's going to be a resume builder, number one, but even internally for pay increases or raises or promotions, that would be like a key thing to kind of have in there. And I would say, don't be afraid of hard-earned experience. And so, especially as a mid-level, you've already been through some fires. You put them out. You figured it out. As you go from mid to senior, those fires will increase dramatically. And the level of your contribution will definitely be something that people are paying attention to. And so if your goal is to go from, let's say, an L3 to L4, you will definitely be a firefighter at that point. So start figuring out what that looks like for you. Hope that helps.
Heck yeah.
All right, y'all. It's been real. It's been fun. And we will see you on the next one. Goodbye, everybody.
Peace.